News.
As the most discriminatory city north of the Mason-Dixon line.
I do remember the signs downtown. We don't serve Negroes, Jews, or dogs.
How did Portland move from being the home of the Coon Chicken Inn to where we are today? This is John Tuttle. Join me as the city tells its own story on Local Color.
Tonight at 10, here on OPB.
Funding for local broadcast of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by a grant from the Intel Foundation. Intel Corporation, the creator of advanced microcomputer chips and systems, has brought the power of microcomputer technology to millions worldwide.
Good evening. I'm Robert McNeil in New York.
And I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. After our news summary tonight, Elizabeth Brackett reports on today's recommendations about silicone breast implants. Then we focus on hate crimes. We have a report on the cross-burning case now with the Supreme Court and a discussion on whether hate groups are growing. Finally, we return to the subject of breast implants with an Ann Taylor Fleming essay.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
A Food and Drug Administration advisory panel today recommended that silicone gel breast implants be put back on the market, but only with restrictions. They suggested that women wanting the implants for either breast reconstruction or enlargement should be allowed to do so only in careful clinical trials. If adopted, the restrictions would mean that implants for purely cosmetic reasons would be unlikely. The panel said no clear cause and effect relationship had been established between ruptured implants and immune disorders, but said more studies needed to be done. Last month, the FDA called for a voluntary moratorium on the use of implants until health concerns could be examined. This week, the panel heard 3 days of testimony on the matter. The FDA will consider the recommendations and make a final determination by April 20th. We'll have highlights from those hearings later in the program. Robin?
Israeli troops and tanks smashed through United Nations barricades in South Lebanon today in a hunt for Shiite Muslim guerrillas. They raided 2 Shiite villages inside the UN peacekeeping zone. 2 Israelis and 4 Shiites were reported killed. UN forces tried unsuccessfully to block the Israeli advance. 4 UN peacekeepers were wounded when they were caught in the crossfire of the Arab-Israeli clashes. Israeli officials said their troops were after terrorists responsible for rocket attacks on Israel. Today's push by Israel north of its self-declared security zone raised fears it was seeking to expand its control of South Lebanon. Robert Moore of Independent Television News reports from the Israeli border.
For 5 days, there has been an intense exchange of artillery and rocket fire. And today, Israel's guns were still targeting strongholds in southern Lebanon being used by pro-Iranian Hezbollah guerrillas. This morning, though, with helicopter gunships flying overhead, Israel changed the scope and intensity of the operation. The artillery duel had become a search and destroy mission. Tanks and armored personnel carriers were brought up to the border region as reinforcements. And in addition, hundreds of ground troops have been committed into Lebanon to hunt down Hezbollah fighters and to demolish their rocket launchers. The damage done by these rockets on northern Israel has not been great, but Israel's Prime Minister, inspecting the damage, has vowed to avenge all such attacks. But the Israeli military has stressed this is not the beginning of a full-scale invasion.
We believe if we had not operated against those terrorist strongholds, that we would be facing more severe attacks against Israeli civilian targets.
Israel is taking a significant political and military risk, hoping to strike quickly and not become bogged down in lengthy ground fighting.
Today's fighting in South Lebanon drew a quick and angry reaction from the United Nations. A UN spokesman read a statement by Secretary General Boutros Ghali this afternoon.
The Secretary General views these developments with grave concern and calls on Israel to withdraw its forces immediately. He wishes to recall that only yesterday the Security Council, in a presidential statement, reaffirmed, and I quote, their commitment to the full sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity of Lebanon within its internationally recognized boundaries as set out in Resolution 425 of 1978, unquote.
At the White House this morning, during a photo session with the Swedish Prime Minister, President Bush refused to answer reporters' questions on why he had not condemned the Israeli offensive. The violence in Lebanon is not expected to delay the next stage of Mideast peace talks. A State Department spokesman today said all parties have sent word they will be in Washington next week for the talks. Israel's opposition Labor Party has a new leader. Former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin defeated Shimon Peres in Israel's first ever party primary yesterday. Prime Minister Shamir's Likud party voted for its candidate today. Shamir easily defeated Housing Minister Ariel Sharon. The victory will pit Shamir against Rabin in Israel's general elections in June.
The nation's trade deficit improved dramatically in 1991, despite ending the year on a sour note. The Commerce Department reported today the surplus amount of exports over imports shrank 35% to $66 billion, the smallest deficit since 1983. Record U.S. exports were a major factor, and the recession helped reduce demand for imports. However, the monthly deficit for December grew 42% over the month before to nearly $6 billion. Also today, the Labor Department reported new unemployment claims rose by 18,000 in the first week of February. That followed 2 weeks of modest declines. In total, 452,000 Americans filed first-time claims. The news was far less gloomy on Wall Street today. The Dow Jones average set another record, closing with a gain of more than 50 points.
South African President de Klerk said today he will hold a referendum to let white voters decide the issue of apartheid. De Klerk's announcement came a day after his ruling party lost a special parliamentary election to pro-apartheid conservatives. That defeat could influence the government's power-sharing talks with the African National Congress and other black groups. Kevin Dunn of Independent Television News reports from Johannesburg.
Gambling his and his ruling party's future, President de Klerk told Parliament he will resign if he loses the whites-only referendum on reform. He later said why he would test the opposition's claim to speak for most white voters.
Their claim that they represent the majority refers specifically to the voters of the House of Assembly. It is that claim on which those voters must now give a verdict.
It was the dramatic victory of the pro-apartheid Conservative Party in a white by-election which stung President de Klerk and the National Party government. His chief political opponent claimed the result left de Klerk without a mandate.
The result in this by-election has a very, very clear message to the white nation, and that is, don't despair. The future is ours.
But the African National Congress said de Klerk should ignore a racist minority.
The writing is at a tiny minority. Our appeal to the Nationalist Party has been that they should look to a broader South African constituency.
But the future of negotiations with Nelson Mandela and the black majority will now be effectively subject to a white minority veto.
A special UN investigator today called Iraq's human rights record the worst since Nazi Germany and said Saddam Hussein is directly responsible. Former Dutch Foreign Minister Max van der Stoel said Baghdad is systematically abusing hundreds of thousands of its own people with chemical attacks, mass executions, and torture. He called for full-time UN monitors in Iraq to end the brutality. Iraq dismissed the charges as a political smear from the West. The UN Secretary General today formally proposed sending 20,000 peacekeeping troops and monitors to Cambodia. The operation would be the largest and most expensive in UN history. It's part of an October peace treaty which ended a dozen years of war in that country.
That's it for the news summary. Just ahead on the news hour, the recommendation on silicone breast implants, the rising concern over hate crimes in America, and an Ann Taylor Fleming essay. First, we do turn to the status of silicone gel breast implants. As we reported earlier, an expert advisory panel to the Food and Drug Administration voted unanimously today to permit further use of the implants only under certain restrictions. Now, FDA Commissioner David Kessler has 60 days to make a final decision based on the panel's advice. Traditionally, the commissioner abides by such advisory panel suggestions. Today's vote came after 3 days of complex and emotional hearings. Elizabeth Brackett brings us the story of the deliberations and today's vote.
During the first 2 days of hearings, the panel struggled with two basic questions. How often do silicone gel breast implants break or leak? And if silicone is then found in the body, does it cause disease? Panelists wanted to know if safety studies done by manufacturers could answer those questions. And if they had the studies, had they fairly reported the results?
If there is anything that scientists will agree on is that there is something about this silicone material that, at least in some people, provokes a profound reaction. They can produce the kinds of symptoms that several of these patients have reported, namely the flu-like symptoms. This is serious stuff.
There are always questions. We know that. I would agree with you about that. We do need to do and are prepared to do more studies. I think we made that commitment this morning.
Dow Corning's response indicated a new willingness of manufacturers to cooperate with the FDA. The company promised to pay for and carry out 30 new safety studies. Despite this offer, Dow Corning and other manufacturers continued to insist that there was no hard scientific data to warrant taking the implants off the market.
I urge you to look at the science and the real evidence presented. The weight of the evidence is not there to justify overturning the recommendations for continued availability.
The panel also heard from physicians with clinical experience in treating patients with diseases that they believed were related to the silicone-filled implants.
This is a woman who had gone through 2 medical centers and had even asked them at the time, could my scleroderma relate to the implants, and they said no, and they offered her penicillamine. When she came to see me, she said she didn't want to take penicillamine, and I said, you might want to take the breast implants out. She had them removed, and the follow-up now is about 4 years, and she's had a definite improvement in terms of decreased skin involvement, increased amount of diffusing capacity, and lack of need for anti-inflammatory medicines.
My opinion is that we're, at this point, in a similar situation to the mothers along the Connecticut River who saw an epidemic of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and thought it was unusual, and it ended up evolving into Lyme disease. Similar to the physicians in Los Angeles with homosexual males whose immune system was collapsing in an unusual fashion. We have some suspicious findings at this point. We don't know the outline. We don't know the size of the problem. We don't know the full clinical definition of the syndrome. But at this point, we're suspicious and believe it's probable that there is a connective tissue disease linked to silicone.
Not all doctors agreed. Some of the most vocal supporters of silicone implants were plastic surgeons who had used the implants for the past 30 years.
At the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, surgeons have implanted over 1,100 silicone gel-filled prostheses after mastectomy in the past 15 years. These patients also have been followed on a long-term basis, including mammography. According to a recent survey by Dr. David Kinney, Chief of the Breast Surgery Service, and Dr. Ted Chiglacian, Chief of the Reconstructive Oncology Service, neither they nor their entire surgical staff know of a single patient they have personally treated who has subsequently developed an autoimmune disease, including scleroderma.
Just as physicians were split, many women who had grappled with the issue of breast implants were also deeply divided.
I am the evidence. I am the experiment that everyone is watching. A year and a half ago, my rheumatologist recommended that my implants be removed. At that time, I was given a 50% chance of recovery. I was on Medi-Cal insurance. I had no other options and no money. My only source to get the surgery done was through UCLA. It took 2 letters from my rheumatologist 2 letters from the staff plastic surgeon to approve that surgery for explantation. 9 months later, a year to the date, February 7th, 1991, I had those implants removed. At the time of removal, I was so full of edema, you could see 3 chins. You could not see my wrists or my ankles. Within 2 days, you could see, visibly see, all of my body. Within 2 months, my liver enzymes had reduced significantly. There is not anecdotal evidence. You're looking at it.
Silicone gel breast implants saved my life. 9 months after my mother's agonizing death from breast cancer, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was July of 1990, and at that time in my life, I was a 45-year-old widow with 2 daughters, 10 and 12 years old, to raise. I chose to have bilateral mastectomies with immediate reconstruction because silicone gel breast implants were available and offered me a good cosmetic result.
My daughter had no major documented health problems prior to the implant surgery. The symptoms, including headaches and systemic, started around 9 months after the silicone breast implant surgery. The symptoms increased during the second 9-month period post-surgery and up to the time of her untimely death. I do believe that the implants were a contributing factor in the cause of her death. I'm angry that more information was not given to her prior to surgery. I believe that her death could have been prevented.
Silicone gel implants were to be my choice. And to me, they marked the final stage in my recovery from breast cancer, restoring the disfiguring effects of my surgery through restoration. And now I find that my choice has been denied. And I can't tell you really how frustrating it is and how strongly I feel to know that a federal agency can restrict my access to a product that my personal physician and I agree on is right and a necessary one for me.
When the panel met again this morning, they began the process of trying to sift through 36 hours of testimony from the last 2 days to try and come up with concrete advice for women on what to do about their implants.
But that was not easy. The first question the panel tackled, how long do the implants last?
There is really no data on the lifetime of implants. So we're sort of stuck with zero there. You can make some guesses that the implants that were being taken out that seemed to have ruptured were probably in the age group of 10 or more years. But that's just hearsay information, so it doesn't give us any idea how long an implant actually lasts and whether a half lasts for 7 years or what, we don't really know.
I think we do have some information on breakage rates. When Dr. Matnowski opened this with her first comment, she pointed out that we have to say we don't know. I think that the manufacturers have numbers. I think we should present those numbers in our answer when we give it. We can state that the breakage reported rupture rates back to manufacturers for Dow Corning is about 1%, McGann less than 1%, whatever it is.
You can go out and buy a tire for a car and know whether it's a 40,000-mile tire or an 80,000-mile tire, but a woman cannot buy an implant and know whether it's going to last a week or 10 years.
There was more disagreement on the critical question, should women be told that implants cause disease?
Certainly, we've been given no evidence that there's either an increase in autoimmune diseases or that indeed there are autoimmune mechanisms that are induced by silicone.
I would raise the issue that silicone may be causal, and I believe the laboratory data is compelling that it produces sustained, many-decade chronic inflammation with tissue-destructive effects. In what percentage of women this occurs, I don't know. I believe from my own limited clinical experience, this is a real problem in a woman with a rupture.
I have believed that this was a real phenomenon, and I've been looking for it. And every patient I've seen since the early 80s, I've asked if every female if she had breast implants, and I simply haven't seen what has been described except for the 2 cases that I mentioned to you. I think that it's hard to argue against good studies. I'm all in favor of good studies. But I think that the data that we've been presented is what we have to make a decision on, and I think we're doing a disservice to the American people and to the women who have these implants if we imply at the end of our discussions today that there's really something to this. I just simply don't believe that the information that we have to deal with states that.
You know, I really would like to see more questions come out from this panel than trying to attempt to answer questions vaguely. There's a range of answers. There's a range of patients. There is no one, and there is not two, and there is not three answers for these questions. You can't answer these questions for the general public because when you get a patient, you're only dealing with one person.
Finally, late this afternoon, the panel took on the question that had brought them all together. Should silicone gel implants be allowed on the market?
If we remove the implants from general usage at this point in time because we feel that the data is immature, and if we do this on the grounds of theoretical considerations, it's going to be giving the wrong message to our patients. They're going to be interpreting this as more meaningful data than we've got right now.
I believe there should be restriction of silicone implants across the board, except for those women in whom reconstruction is necessary and cannot be accomplished in any other way, or other victims of congenital deformity or accidents. And that is because I think that the benefit to women who request augmentation is mitigated by certain risks that they experience that are not experienced by the breast cancer victim looking for reconstruction. Namely, augmentation of the breast threatens its primary functions, its functions of lactation, and its functions of sexual sensitivity and of bonding with an infant. Those primary functions for which the augmented young woman is at risk typically do not apply in the case of reconstruction. I'm left very concerned. I'm concerned with the amount of energy, time, and money that has been invested over the past 30 years and over the past 12 months and over the past 3 days on an issue that initially was generated with a concern to reshape the female breast and to make it more pleasing to herself and others. During that same period of time, the incidence of breast cancer has gone up, and there has been very little new progress in finding a cure. I can only wonder what might have occurred had the amount of money spent on breast recontouring been spent instead on attempts to find a cure for breast cancer. Hopefully the trend toward lumpectomy will help to conserve a number of breasts. And I would leave you with this thought, that a woman without breasts is a total woman, just as a man who has gone bald and is without hair is still a total man.
In a series of votes at the end of the day, the advisory panel first unanimously rejected an outright ban on silicone gel breast implants, and then voted to allow implants for both augmentation and reconstruction, but only under strict clinical evaluation. The Food and Drug Administration now has 60 days to act on the panel's recommendations and make a final decision.
Still ahead on the NewsHour, hate crimes and more thoughts on breast implants from Ann Taylor Fleming.
Next tonight, we focus on hate crimes, crimes against race, religion, or sexual orientation, crimes against specific groups of people. Today, an Arab group issued a report saying that crimes against Arab Americans increased dramatically in 1991 as a result of the Gulf War. Earlier this month, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith released its annual report, which found a record number of anti-Semitic incidents during the year. And a report out earlier this week said the number of white supremacist groups increased last year from 273 to 346, a 27% increase. That report was by a group called Klan Watch. We'll discuss hate crimes and efforts to stop them in a moment. First, we look at one hate crime in a case now before the Supreme Court. Correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro of public station KCTA, St. Paul, Minnesota, has this backgrounder.
The case began its journey to the High Court in this working-class, mostly white neighborhood on St. Paul's east side. Russell and Laura Jones moved here with their 5 children in March 1989. They were greeted with a steadily increasing barrage of vandalism. It climaxed with a cross burning late one night.
I looked out the rear window of the house and I saw this glow. The first thing that came to my mind was, well, what now did they do to my car? They set it on fire. So I kind of jumped out of bed and went to the window and looked out, and yes, I was quite shocked and surprised to see what I did see.
It was a culmination of a night of unsupervised activity which involved LSD, marijuana, and alcohol.
St. Paul police charged 2 juvenile suspects soon after the incident. Chief William McCutcheon said his department had been watching them.
There's a loosely knit group of young white males who hang around Mounds Park, who do some graffiti, and who on occasion seem to spontaneously do these things.
One juvenile pled no contest, but the second suspect challenged the city ordinance he was charged with violating. That law passed here in St. Paul is aimed at so-called bias-motivated crimes. St. Paul's Ordinance 292.02 makes it a misdemeanor to place on public or private property any symbol, object, characterization, or graffiti which the perpetrator knows or has reasonable grounds to know arouses anger, alarm, or resentment in others based on race, color, creed, religion, or gender.
The true interest of this ordinance is to stifle displays of unpopular political conduct.
Defense lawyers argue the law is similar to measures that once made it a crime to burn the American flag. Last year, the Supreme Court threw out those statutes, ruling that flag burning is a form of political expression. In the St. Paul cross-burning case, defense attorney Edward Cleary argued successfully at the juvenile trial court level. On appeal here before Minnesota's Supreme Court, he called the city ordinance far too sweeping.
292.02 begins whoever places on public or private property, anywhere in the city of St. Paul, public, private property. This includes the actor's own property. This includes someone else's property with their permission. And perhaps most importantly, and what cannot be forgotten, is that it includes public forums, the steps of the Capitol.
Cleary said the frequent demonstrations here over abortion technically violate the city ordinance. These and many other forms of political expression, he feels, could arouse anger, alarm, or resentment.
There are a lot of shopping malls, among other places right now, they're banning colors and symbols of various sports groups, such as the LA Raiders, which is viewed as gang colors now. Technically, that could be prosecuted as a symbol that upsets a white person on the basis of race. So there's all kinds of possibilities. You really have to let your imagination go.
I don't agree at all.
Tom Foley is Ramsey County Attorney, the chief prosecutor in St. Paul. He says there's a clear line between offensive conduct that is and isn't protected by the First Amendment.
Certainly, you analyze the facts, you analyze the context, you analyze all the total circumstances, and you reach a decision whether or not you think a crime has been committed.
So even if this ordinance were limited just specifically to the cross and the swastika, you would say it was unconstitutional?
I would say that considering that the range of the ordinance, public or private property, it is so broad that if you attempt...
After hearing the arguments, the Minnesota Supreme Court upheld the St. Paul Ordinance. Although allowing that the law may be too broadly worded, the court construed the measure narrowly, saying it could be applied in the cross-burning case. The burning cross is a symbol of violence and hatred based on notions of racial supremacy, one justice wrote, and diverse communities have the responsibility, even obligation, to confront such notions in whatever form they appear. In St. Paul, Attorney Cleary argues such laws are unnecessary. Along with the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union and others, he says there already are adequate criminal laws that don't raise First Amendment questions.
If you burned leaves or garbage in someone's front lawn, you could charge them with open burning law violation or trespass or maybe even criminal damage to property. If you burn a cross in someone's front lawn, depending on the circumstances, they're an African-American family, etc., you can charge them with terroristic threats.
But supporters of hate crime laws say they are essential because bias-motivated conduct affects both the individuals targeted and the larger community or group. All black residents in East St. Paul, for example.
People move out of neighborhoods when this sort of thing happens.
Minnesota State Representative Karen Clark co-authored her state's hate crime statute. She worries about the message its invalidation would send.
You take it to court, and you can overturn them, and you can get off scot-free. I think that's a very dangerous message right now, considering the rising tide of racism and bigotry and homophobia and violence against women.
Meanwhile, Russell and Laura Jones say they've encountered no problems since the cross-burning incident, perhaps even because of it.
Well, there was lots of people coming by and calling and sending cards and letters to let us know that not everybody feels this way. And even for most people that might have some kind of prejudice or racist attitudes in themselves, they would never resort to doing such a thing.
Among other things, the Jones neighbors have worked closely with police to set up crime watches since the cross-burning incident. If the U.S. Supreme Court decides the St. Paul ordinance is too broad, many legal experts say the High Court is not likely to salvage a narrower interpretation, as the state court did. So the entire ordinance could be thrown out, potentially affecting dozens of similar bias motivation laws across the country.
We turn now to a look at how state and local officials are coping with hate crimes. The FBI has been collecting data on these incidents as well as establishing bias crime training procedures nationwide. Jack McDevitt is working with the FBI on that report, which is due out later this year. He's the Associate Director of the Center for Applied Social Research at the College of Criminal Justice at Northeastern University in Boston. He's joined by three people with different views on the causes and the cures of the problem. Richard Samp is the Chief Counsel of the Washington Legal Foundation. Deborah Glick is a New York State Assemblywoman from New York City. She co-sponsored a bias crime bill now before the State Assembly. Denton Watson is a former spokesman for the NAACP. Mr. Watson is the author of Lion in the Lobby, a biography of civil rights activist Clarence Mitchell and his fight to pass civil rights laws. Let's see if we agree, first of all, on the facts and premises in this. Ms. Glick, the Anti-Defamation League and the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, as we've said at the beginning, both say hate crimes are increasing. Do you agree?
I think there's a great deal of evidence from around the country that that is in fact the case, and it is shocking in some communities to what extent it has increased, and in all different categories, race, religion, sexual orientation.
Mr. McDevitt, you're collecting some of this data. Mr. McDevitt in Boston, do you agree that hate crimes are on the increase?
It appears that they are. As you know, the data is coming in. We have an issue of people being more aware, so they're reporting these crimes more. But in addition to that, there seems to be what some people describe as an ugliness out there that hasn't been seen for a while. And I think that that is promoting some additional hate-motivated behavior.
Mr. Camp in Washington, do you agree?
It seems to me that what's really happening is that people are becoming more aware of this subject. They are going out of their way to report these sort of incidents. I don't think we can really say one way or the other whether there is more hate crime than there was before.
Mr. Samp, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you Mr. Camp. Mr. Samp, beg your pardon. And Mr. Watson, do you think hate crimes are increasing?
Yes, I do think hate crimes are increasing, and that is
as a result of the climate in which we now live.
It's not just that we're more sensitive or more aware and reporting them more.
Definitely not, because there is now a climate of reaction. It's a very reactionary climate in which we are now living and passing through. And as a result, we find that many people feel free to express themselves in these very negative ways and are continuing to do so and to threaten those who are different from them, and to threaten various groups.
Mr. Semp, and I'll go around on this, let me put this another way. Leaving aside whether these are crimes at the moment, would you agree with the state representative from Minnesota, Karen Clark, whom we saw in that report, who sees, quote, a rising tide of racism and bigotry and homophobia and violence against women? Would you agree with that statement?
I don't think that's an accurate depiction. I do think that race relations in this country have deteriorated in recent years, but I think that that can be attributed to a large number of different causes. I think one of them has perhaps been the heightened sensitivity by all groups looking perhaps for special entitlements for themselves, with the result that that resentment builds up among all groups.
Yeah. How do you agree with the state representative in Minnesota? Is there this rising tide of racism?
I believe that,
I mean, those are very strong words, a rising tide.
And I think they're accurate. And I think that the dismissive attitude that Mr. Semp has displayed, we've seen before in areas like rape. As rape was increasing, there were people who said, oh, well, women are just reporting it more. But in fact, there were more rapes committed. And I think that if you are in a group that is usually not the target of those kinds of crimes, you could very easily miss the reality.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. McDivitt, as the man with the data, do you think we are justified in saying there's a rising tide of racism, bigotry, homophobia, violence against women?
Well, I don't think that the numbers can be the source. I don't think we can rely exclusively on the numbers. We have to take the numbers which are increasing, as you said in the beginning of your piece. The ADL's numbers are increasing, Klan Watch's numbers are increasing, a number of local cities departments are increasing, and several states are increasing. So, but that can be partly a reporting effect. But also, different human rights groups around the country are experiencing this. Different police, quasi-police agencies are experiencing it. So I think that we're seeing it from a variety of different sources, and that's what makes me feel that, yes, it is increasing.
Mr. Semp, enlarge for a moment on your explanation of whatever the phenomenon is, why it is. You said a moment ago you thought it's because civil rights groups have led us into, led minority groups into expecting or demanding entitlements, and that has angered people who feel hurt by that.
Well, I think what we need to look at is who is it that is finding, for example, more discrimination against Arabs? It's the Arab groups. It is every special interest group that is, not surprisingly, finding that they are being more victimized. And the result, of course, is that they would like to have more protections, more rights given to their particular group to remedy this supposed rising tide. It seems to me that all that's going to do is to get people feeling defensive, saying, wait a second, I'm not racist, I'm not doing this. And I think it sours racial relations in this country. What we need to be doing is identifying what it is that we consider a crime. For example, intimidating a homeowner to move out of a neighborhood. That's a crime, prosecuted as an assault, and not worry so much as to what the motivation for the crime was.
How do you explain what you see as whether it's a rising tide or just an increase in crimes or behavior of this sort?
I think Mr. Semp's explanation of the problem is very misleading and naive and myopic, because we have to go back, we have to have a better understanding of the historical nature of racism, of discrimination. And when we do that, we see patterns that are evident now, going all the way back through history. And sure, the Arabs and other groups, apart from blacks, are complaining more, are protesting more about discrimination against them. But that is as a result of the learning experience that they had from the civil rights movement. They saw what blacks had experienced throughout history, and now they too are able to identify patterns of discrimination, and they are very, very clear patterns of discrimination.
And you're including Jewish Americans and homosexuals and things
Yes,
in
I
that
do,
same
I do.
consciousness-raising